Judas? Is it with a kiss that you betray the Son of Man?
Hello, my name is Robbie. On here, I am Templar Knight. Every person who believes in God but does not attend a church has a story why. But whenever two or more people gather in God's name, He is there. So this is church. Welcome. I'm glad that you're here. Tonight we are going to kind of take an unusual break from the series. We've been talking about Judas now. And I've constantly referenced the book of Judas, the Gnostic gospel that was written and inspired by Judas. Because when I was trying to find information about him, it was hard. And this book kept popping up. And I've always said we need to have an open mind and just kind of, take any information with a grain of salt. And every time I've thought about this book of Judas, it's always kind of gotten me anxious and a little uptight and nervous and just kind of talking about stuff that isn't in the Bible. I've always told myself, just because it doesn't say it happened this way, it doesn't say that it didn't happen this way. And that constant phrase, history is written by the victors. So that's why the Gospel of Judas they tried to destroy. But then I realized I might accidentally be misleading everyone. So I wanted to talk tonight about the book of Judas and why it's not true. So first, if we start off with this, the majority of the books in the Bible were written within the first 100 years, A.D., Anno Domini, after the year of Jesus. That's how they do the time. There's A.D. and B.C., all based on the birth of Christ. Pretty much all the books in the Bible were written within those first 100 years. But the Gospel of Judas, it doesn't fit in that time frame. It doesn't fit that pre-70s AD beliefs. In fact, it's written more like with Greek Gnostic ideas pertaining with like the supernatural. It talks of archons and aeons and stuff like that wasn't talked about until later texts from the 2nd and 3rd century, 200 and 300. So it doesn't fit the timeline, just from the way it's written. And when the book of Judas talks about Jesus and his teaching, it portrays Jesus more of a Greek philosopher than a Jewish rabbi that the Bible portrays him to be. And that doesn't really make sense because Jesus was a Jewish rabbi. And the movement of the Greek philosophers hadn't quite come into full swing in the time that Jesus was teaching. Many of the things the book of Judas says that Jesus was teaching would have been considered blasphemy. Even his disciples would have turned on him for the things that the book of Judas has Jesus say. Now granted, Jesus was later accused of blasphemy by the high priest and he was crucified for it, but nowhere near to the extent that was said in the book of Judas. And I realize there's really only one way that I can explain this. I'm going to read a selection from the book of Judas. Now the book of Judas, it's really short, or at least what we have access to because a lot of it was destroyed. But there comes a time when Jesus goes to the disciples and they are praying. And Jesus laughs at them and he mocks them because they don't understand how to pray and they're doing it wrong. And Jesus challenges them, any of them, to look at him, to stand up and look him in the eyes. But none of them will. except for Judas. And so Jesus sees that Judas isn't afraid of him. And so Jesus takes Judas aside to reveal the greater secrets. This is what the book of Judas is known for, that Judas had access to secret knowledge that none of the others could. So this is what it says. He's talking about the gods and their power. The first is Yahweh, who was called the Good One. The second, Harmanthoth, the Eye of Fire. The third is Galia. The fourth is Yobel. The fifth, Adonias. These were the 5 who ruled over Hades and are the first over chaos. Then Sacklus said to his angels, "Let us create a human being after the likeness and the image." And they fashioned Adam and his wife Eve. That is a direct quote, entire chapter from the book of Judas. The secret knowledge that Judas had of the higher entities. That would make a lot of sense. The Gospel of Judas paints an image of Judas and Jesus having this closer relationship than the rest of the disciples. And because Judas was not afraid, Jesus shared secret knowledge about the heavens and archons and aeons and celestial beings. And after hours of trying to wrap my head around all these new characters, I couldn't make heads or tails of it. Why? Because it tries to tie Christianity in with entities from other religions. Portraying the God of Christianity as only one of many celestial deities. It even paints him as a demon and a troublemaker. I was trying to be open-minded about this. Because, it's been so easy for me to be open-minded about the information about Judas. But I just couldn't figure these people out, these characters, these new aeons and archons and deities. I just couldn't figure it out. Honestly, it kind of brought me back in the day when I was trying to study up on angels and demons and the roles they played in their hierarchy, because that at least made sense to me. How many of you all knew that there are different types of angels? Different tier levels. See, angels... I found a picture I wanted to show you guys. I've had this on my phone for forever, but I went and found it for today. These are the angels and their hierarchy. Up at the top here, we have the throne, the seraphim and the cherubim. They are those who are the highest and closest to God. Down at the very bottom is where we have angels and archangels. The seraphim, they have wings over their eyes. Because despite all their glory and power, not even they can look upon God. They have wings that cover their feet. Because despite all their power, not even they can touch the ground near God. We hear stories about angels and the archangels. Why? Because they are, in the heavenly hierarchy, the lowest. They are the ones most capable of interacting with humans. And we talk about angels as being the lowest, and yet we know how powerful angels are. We talked about them. How one angel wiped out an entire army that was sent to try and conquer Jerusalem. And angels are the lowliest. Maybe angels and demons just make sense to me because they're one of the key points in the religion that I've studied. And they've had a great influence on my faith. And I was struggling so much with these other characters, Sacklus and Haraloth. hair loss, Haraloth, because they are not figures in Christianity. And it was when I was writing that I realized a giant light bulb went off in my head, and it all became clear to me. It doesn't make sense because the Gospel of Judas is not a part of Christianity. It's not in the Bible for a reason. It was written to try and excite and draw people in with these ideas of secret and hidden knowledge outside of what is accepted and true, and it romanticized these ideas. And it opens a door to a different religion and beliefs and gods, and it's ridiculous. It's confusing and nonsensical. And most importantly, it's dangerous. For the last month, I've been studying up on Judas, and I have been interested in this book and the different perspective on such a hated person, and it intrigued me. I was drawn in. I was fascinated by this. But I did the same thing with this book that so many people do with the Bible. I treated this book like a buffet line. I wanted to read just this part. And I didn't want to have any of this, so I just passed over it. And then a line or two more from here. And I went over this book, gathering the parts that I wanted to know for my own personal gain. But you can't do that with books. You can't do that with knowledge. You can't just only accept the parts you want. It'd be like if I was reading Harry Potter. For anyone who knows me, I can't stand Professor Snape. So what if I decided to go through those books again and just completely ignore every section of the book that he is in? Just say, nope, that's not part of Harry Potter. Professor Snape doesn't exist to me. He's not a part of this book. I don't like him. I can't just skip over parts. I can't just skip over Professor Snape because so much of what he does and so much of what that character brings to the story matters. The book wouldn't have been the same without him. Just because I don't like him doesn't mean he's not important to the story. But that's the mindset I had when I was reading the book of Judas. I was just taking an interest in the parts about Judas himself and ignoring all the crazy things that are said because I don't like them. And I was telling myself that the parts I like could possibly be true, even though I thought all the rest of it was just complete rubbish. And as Christians, this is something we know all too well. It's how many of us read through the Bible. We only listen to the parts we like. And the parts that we don't like, we just ignore and we pretend they don't matter. We want to hear all the good parts about how much God loves us and his forgiveness and his blessings, and we just want to skip past and ignore the parts that talk about sin. The parts that talk about the things we're supposed to be doing and we're not because it's an inconvenience to our daily lives. Or the things that we are doing and we shouldn't be, because that part of the Bible calls me out and I don't like that. So we treat the Bible like a buffet line. Jesus loves me. Yep. A relationship with Jesus and accepting as my Savior equals heaven. Yep, I'm gonna take that. And then we see parts like, don't take the Lord's name in vain. Nah, I'm just gonna skip over that. I'm gonna go straight to the part where God will forgive me instead. Sin is bad. Well, yeah, what if I just tell myself that the sin that I do isn't so bad? There's worse sin. There's other bad ones that matter more. And I'm sure that God's okay with what I'm doing because I think I'm a good person. And I know God will forgive me, so the Bible was not meant to be taken apart so that we could feel better about ourselves. The Bible, in its entirety, is our guide. It is our word from God to instruct us and educate us. We don't get to just pick and choose. So I have to accept that the book of Judas, in its entirety, is false. And it was not put in the Bible because it was false. If all the Bible wasn't true, then maybe they could have squeezed it in there just to share the few interesting parts that I'm curious about. But they couldn't. Because the Bible is the truth. All of it. Including the parts we don't want to read. And when I was looking into this week took me down a rabbit hole. But I came upon an interesting reference that I'd like to share tonight. See, there's a term called cross-referencing, which is when like a book or online works makes a reference to or refers to something else, some other information that's already been given. And I love it because on the internet, they have these things that are called hyperlinks. And I use these hyperlinks all the time. I find something I'm interested in, I'm reading it. And then all of a sudden there's a sentence and there's a keyword that's underlined. And if I click on that word, it takes me to another section, another site, where I find out more information about that word, about that person, about whatever it was referencing. And then I can read about that. And then I find another key word with a name or a comment or something that I'm interested in, something that sparks my attention. I click on that. And it takes me somewhere else. And so down the rabbit hole of internet information I go. The internet makes it all too easy for us to learn with these references. Reading the Bible online has been more exciting for me than any time I've read the Bible because of how easy it is for me to gather more information because it's all there. At the click of a button, I've got access to it. But it's not just online that they do this. It's not just about websites. They even do this referencing thing in the movies. You know, like at the end of the movie, they do the big reveal, the big plot twist. And they have this short flashback. And they show us all the times earlier in the movie where they deliberately snuck in this information. They just sneakily put a little thing here and there to reference this big plot twist. It's a great part of writing to work it all in so it all ties together. Because you can't just Scooby-Doo the end of every show where they pull off the map and say, oh, it was Harry the Hypnosis all along. You have to set up the information so that it can be referenced later. You have to have a good cross-reference to help you set up a good story. For an author to have a good story, they need to build this up. And honestly, whether it's in a book or a movie, there is nothing better than realizing that the answer was right in front of you the entire time, and you just didn't realize it. That's when you know that the writer is good at their trade. All those great droppings of subtle hints, all those small references come together to complete the story. Now let's imagine someone wrote a book series. Not just 5 books, like currently Game of Thrones has, or even 7 books like Harry Potter. Not even 28 books like in the Dune series. Let's jump all the way to a series that has 66 books. How many times do you think they need to build those references? Well, let's make this harder. Instead of it being written by one author, like Harry Potter and Game of Thrones, or 3 authors, like with Dune, because those are the series I looked up today. What if these 66 books were written by 36 different authors? Can you imagine what a mess that should be? To have so many stories, all pertaining in the same series, but written by so many different people. I'm sure you guys have already figured out where I'm going with this. There are 31,102 verses in the Bible, spread out among 66 books, written by 36 different people. How many references do you think there are to other parts? Just a guess. 50? 100? There are 63,779 references to other verses in the Bible. For one person to have written the Bible and find a way to incorporate that many cross-references to earlier and later texts would be amazing. But for 36 people over 100 years to come together and have almost 64,000 references, sometimes to books that parts that hadn't even been written yet. I'm going to show you what that looks like, because I found this image. Not that one. Let's try this one. This is a chart. Every single one of these black bars at the bottom is a Bible verse. Every single arcing line is a reference point saying that this Bible verse ties in directly to this one. It ties into this one. It ties into this one. This rainbow is what 64,000 references look like. And it's not just like little bridges, little hills going from one book to the next. There are things at the very beginning referencing the very end. It's beautiful. It is literary genius. To do that should have been impossible. Except for 2 things. They weren't making up these stories. They can so easily reference each other because it all happened. Secondly, God inspired them to write it. If the Bible were fake, this wouldn't be possible from a literary standpoint. The only way this could have happened is because it's true. It is a real history. It all happened. God, the angels, Jesus, all of it. This Bible could not have been created unless it was true. So I'm going to try my hand at being a good writer, and I'm going to try and improve this lesson by referencing points that I had made earlier. The Gospel of Judas was not written in the same time as the books of the Bible or the times that it was writing about. It claims that Jesus taught things that directly go against what Jesus taught. When God gathered a council of scholars and religious leaders to go through the books presented for the Bible, the book of Judas was not chosen, which means Judas did not have secret knowledge the others did not. But he did have an important part to play in the life and the death of Jesus. And next week, we will go over all the details of what he did and why it had to be done.
Judas, is it with a kiss that you betray the Son of Man?